Now than
You're good.
All right. Good morning, class. All right, we're ready to go. So today we are going to be talking about trophic levels and how energy is transferred between trophic levels. Okay. So if you recall from last period, we discussed the four levels of trophic interactions. Okay. So the original place where energy comes from in a food web, does anyone recall what those organisms are called, the group that they belong to? They get light, they take light from the sun and producers, correct. Okay? So they're gaining their energy from the sun and converting that into sugars that they use for their life processes, right? To grow and be plants. And so we have then above producers, we have things that eat the producers, okay? So who can recall what those are termed? Consumers, okay? So if we have the immediate level, they're just eating the producers. We have consumers, and more specifically, they're called primary consumers, okay? So the top consumers, or the primary consumers, the ones that are eating right above the producers. So what do we call a consumer if it eats a primary consumer? Okay, does that make sense? So we have another organism that eats a primary consumer. Does anyone have any idea what they're called? Besides maybe a carnivore? A secondary consumer, right? So then what might we call a consumer that eats a secondary consumer? Any ideas? So primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. Okay? So just thinking about building upon one another as far as levels, and those are called trophic levels. All right? So today in class, we're going to specifically, we're going to go into this next. We're going to list examples of organisms at these four different trophic levels that you have experience from in your lives. And we are going to compare the energy available to those organisms at the various trophic levels. So what comes into the system initially, and how is that transferred as we go up in the trophic levels, okay? So, give me some examples. Why don't you, in your small groups that you have there, talk briefly about examples of producers you can come up with, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. So take a minute to do that.
plants.
Producers.
We had to have four of them, right?
Plants.
So
Algae.
trees, grass,
Smoke algae.
acorns. Acorns.
You guys are coming up with producers? Great, looks like you're coming up with some great producers. So go ahead and continue on to those primary consumers.
Squirrels. Squirrels.
Fish. Well, fish eat bugs. So do squirrels sometimes.
There are two different types of consumers.
Pandas.
Okay, so what is the
Evolutionary failures.
Let's think about this. Okay, so thank you guys. You can stop for a moment. We're going to come back and get some examples from you. So I had a group over here think of a specific organism that they wanted to talk about and what trophic level it belongs to. So Ms. Sorensen, can you, Ms. Talbot, can you tell me what example you were speaking of?
We were talking about how we eat turkey for Thanksgiving.
Okay, so let's think about these trophic levels involved. You ate turkey, so as the humans involved here, what trophic level are we at when we're eating a turkey?
Tertiary.
Any ideas?
Tertiary.
Secondary, potentially tertiary, because you have to know a little bit about the turkey here. Okay, so what's the turkey eat?
Bugs.
Grain.
Grains, and they also eat a lot of insects. Turkeys do eat insects. Okay, so we have the turkey could both be considered, depending on what it's actually eating. It could be the primary consumer, or if it's eating insects, it could be that secondary consumer, right? So then that puts us as the
Secondary or
tertiary consumer. So depending on what that turkey's been eating. Does that make sense? Okay. So what we're going to do now is on your tables there is a set of 4 bowls. Each of the bowls is labeled with a trophic level. And you also have a little activity sheet available to you. And what we have is a bag of Cheerios now. Don't get too excited about these. We are in a lab environment, so we cannot ingest these Cheerios. I apologize for that. If I knew this was a cleaner classroom, for sure, I would share my Cheerios with you. But today we cannot. So those Cheerios today are representing energy units available at the different trophic levels. That right there in that bag is 100 energy units, okay? And you'll use, there are 6 steps here for you to follow to observe how that energy is transferred between the trophic levels. At the top here, there's a sentence or two that is italicized underneath the title for the activity. Can somebody volunteer to read that to me real quick? Okay, either one of you, go ahead. Mrs. Detillion, go ahead.
In this activity, you'll observe the amount of energy transferred from one trophic level to the next. Keep in mind that only 10% of the energy in the system makes it to the next trophic level.
Okay, so that is the amount, the energy entering the system is the amount of Cheerios entering the bowl. Okay, so go ahead and follow those steps quickly, and we will follow those steps and count those out. And let me know if you have any questions.
10.
Okay, so then 10% of the next one. And then to do that. Oh.
You need
Gonna
break
have
this
to
thing
use
up.
those math
You
skills
You
today
need to
to
estimate
figure
here,
this
that is
out.
fine.
Gotta figure out
Well,
percentages
half of that
of
is, oh yeah.
the energy units being transferred here.
Yeah.
So much.
Uh-oh, it's only gonna be dust by the time I'm done.
Does that result right to you? as far
That is
as-
too much. It's okay.
How does that
With variation in energy into the trophic levels.
or get so much?
Are you done?
Okay, so how does that happen? So is there a different amount of
You know, a lot of energy.
thinking about the
goes
amount
towards
of producers on the landscapes versus the amount of tertiary consumer on the landscapes? Think about the population sizes.
So we did not get very much energy from those plants.
No,
With the turkey.
the turkey's sitting, where was he?
Turkey is right here. We're right here. Turkey's here. Bugs are here. Plants are there.
Turkeys.
How are you guys
So
doing over here?
we're right here.
So, all right,
So
looks like
we-
everybody's
this is the
completed the activity. So let's look at these review questions down at the bottom real quick, okay, and make some sense of your observations you're making. So the first question is the amount of energy available to the producers and the secondary consumers the same?
No.
And that turkey is going to be both a secondary and tertiary, or a primary and secondary consumer, but really we'll just consider it a secondary consumer because it does eat bugs. So we'll just say it's a secondary consumer, okay? So there's a lot more energy available to those producers, right, versus the secondary consumers. All right, is the amount of energy available to the secondary consumers and the tertiary consumers the same? Okay, so thinking about visually, we're seeing here that energy availability to those different levels is pretty drastically different, right? Okay, so two questions here. Which trophic level has the greatest amount of energy available to it? Producers, where is that energy coming from for those producers? The sun primarily, right? There's a few weird ones out there, okay? Just so you know, there's some things that eat sulfur and crazy stuff like that. But yeah, you're right. Light, is your question there?
I'm just wondering why they have the greatest amount of energy. Are they just more efficient at processing the energy?
So they have the greatest amount available to them, meaning that they have pretty much unlimited amount of sunlight coming into them, right? And so they are pretty much, there's other things keeping them from proliferating. So like they also have to have nutrients in order to survive and things like that. But they have an unlimited amount of energy coming into them as long as the sun is shining. Okay, so a lot of energy available that they have in their system, we'll just say that. So like a plant has this energy available to it. Now when that primary consumer eats it, the energy that's transferred to it is 10% of that. So that one, those 10 Cheerios are then from the original energy of this one plant. This, we're going to say the whole plant was eaten, but all the energy that plant used and produced throughout its life, only a small portion of that is actually transferred to that primary consumer. Okay? So that primary consumer has to eat a lot of producers in order for it to survive, just like the plant had to take up a lot of sunlight for it to survive. Does that make sense? I don't know if this is helping, but so Leon.
I was just gonna say, is it, the producers have a lot of energy, is it because they make their own energy, just, like an auto truck instead of a hedgerow truck, but we steal our energy from them?
That's part of it, but it's more like this is the amount of energy that's initially converted from the sun. So sun energy coming in, we're making this energy available for use, okay? The primary consumers cannot make that energy available for anyone else, the sun energy available for anything else to eat. Does that make sense? Only the producers can. So this is like initial conversion of solar energy into food energy, okay? And from those producers, only a little bit of that initial energy that came from the sun is available to that next level, okay? And then so on up the system, all right? So one last question. How does this relate to the abundance of the members? So how many organisms or how big the populations are of organisms that are in these certain trophic levels? So how does the amount of producers on the landscape compare to the amount of tertiary consumers on the landscape? Are there more tertiary consumers, less tertiary consumers? A lot less, right? Because they are not converting energy directly from the sun. They don't have the unlimited energy coming into them, right? The producers do. So there's lots and lots of producers. But everything else has to eat the producers, okay? So we have to have lots of producers to be able to feed the rest of the organisms on the planet.